Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone.
Representatives from Tennessee's Memphis Police Department say that they've arrested a 32-year-old aggravated assault suspect this week after he allegedly left his wallet at the scene of a car wreck where he had been driving a stolen car. According to reports, the incident began just after 12:30 a.m. on August 14th when a group of unidentified victims contacted police and told them they had been attacked by an unknown man. The group said that they'd been hanging out at a local amusement center called Main Event, and while sitting in their car in the business parking lot, had been shot at. At least one of the shots hit their car, though thankfully no one was injured. The victims proceeded to follow the suspect, who was driving a Honda, as he traveled north into the city of Bartlett. At some point during the tense situation, the suspect shot at another car on the road, once again striking the vehicle but not hitting anyone inside. The man then crashed into a field near the intersection of Kirby Whitten Road and Snowshoe Drive. While the suspect managed to flee the scene before police could arrive, it turned out he had left behind quite an important clue: his wallet. Thanks to the ID inside, police were able to identify him as 32-year-old Joseph Sanders. Officers also quickly determined that the car Sanders was driving was stolen, as was the handgun he allegedly used in both shootings. Video footage captured in the area also reportedly showed him fleeing the scene. Not long after, Sanders was arrested at a residence in nearby Tipton County. He has since been charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault, being a convicted felon in the possession of a handgun, and vandalism. Though no motive has been officially reported behind the crimes, we can likely infer that police believe the incident was gang-related, since the 32-year-old was taken to the Memphis Multi-Agency Gang Unit offices following his arrest.
Representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey say that a 57-year-old man is facing federal charges this week, more than a year after he allegedly sought the services of a hitman to carry out the murder of a teenage girl who was living across the country. According to reports, the bizarre and disturbing case began in May of last year when 57-year-old Armando Conceição allegedly began communicating with a person referred to in a federal indictment only as Individual 1. Conceição reportedly asked Individual 1 to, quote, kill or locate another to kill the victim, an unidentified 13-year-old girl who was living in Texas. During the May 2021 meeting, Conceição gave Individual 1 a picture of the teenager and provided him with her address. He also allegedly gave him an undisclosed amount of money for travel expenses. After this, Individual 1 reportedly traveled to San Antonio, Texas, where he stayed for roughly a week while taking pictures of the 13-year-old's house and her father's car. This was followed by another meeting between Individual 1 and Conceição in November of that year, where the 57-year-old allegedly said that they should proceed with the plan. Unbeknownst to Conceição, though, by this point, Individual 1 was now working with police and was wearing a recording device. When the two started discussing details, Individual 1 stated that he knew a guy who could carry out the crime. He said the guy was cheap, explaining, quote, he's charging $15, $10, problem solved. Apparently not suspicious of being quoted a ludicrously low amount of money for such a horrible crime, Conceição continued the conversation and told Individual 1 to make the arrangements with the supposed hitman. When asked what should be done if the intended victim's family turned out to be home at the time of the murder, Conceição allegedly stated, quote, finish with the rest, I don't care. As long as the girl is eliminated, the rest does not matter. Thankfully, investigators busted Conceição before his twisted plan was carried out. While authorities have released almost no additional details about the case, including why he wanted the 13-year-old victim dead in the first place, it said that the teenager is alive and safe. Conceição has now been charged with conspiracy to commit murder for hire and causing another to travel interstate or using interstate facilities with intent that a murder for hire be committed. If convicted, Conceição could reportedly be looking at 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
Representatives from the U.S. Marshals Service say that they are searching for a 49-year-old murder suspect this week after she was released on bond ahead of her trial and disappeared from the residence where she was supposed to be staying. The case began on November 16, 2021, when 51-year-old Harold Lee Wynn was found dead in his home in McDonald County, Missouri. He had been shot in the back of the head while sleeping. Immediately, attention turned to Lee's wife, Dawn, who was reportedly arrested and charged that day for the crime. While Dawn was initially held in police custody, she was recently released in accordance with a 2019 Missouri Supreme Court ruling on a state bond reform law. According to reports we came across, the law reportedly allows certain Missouri criminals out on bond in an effort to make the judicial process fairer to those who cannot afford bail. As one of the conditions of her bond, Dawn was supposed to stay at her mother's residence in Pea Ridge, Arkansas. She reportedly disappeared sometime last week, and no one has seen her since. Dawn's 24-year-old daughter, Savannah, says that the decision to release her mother was made over strong objections from her and many other family members. In a recent interview, she stated, quote, "All of us pretty much begged the judge not to let her out on bond. We just felt she was going to run." Though reports state that Dawn left behind a note at the Pea Ridge property at the time of her disappearance saying she was going to drown herself, Savannah says she believes her mother is too much of a coward and too selfish to take her own life. Instead, she says she thinks she went on the run because she does not want to face the consequences of her actions after realizing she wasn't going to get away with her crime. As for where Dawn is now, family members say there are a number of places she could have gone. She reportedly has ties to Missouri and South Carolina, but could also be headed to Oklahoma, Tennessee, or Florida as well. Authorities are now asking for the public's help in tracking Dawn Wynn down, describing her as 5 foot 2 inches tall, weighing between 150 and 170 pounds, and having short black hair. She is believed to be armed and dangerous. Anyone with information about Dawn's whereabouts is encouraged to reach out to the McDonald County Sheriff's Office in Missouri, the Benton County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas, or the U.S. Marshals Service.
Representatives from Oklahoma's Grady County Sheriff's Office say that a 36-year-old woman is in custody and facing charges this week after she was arrested while behaving erratically, managed to escape her handcuffs, and fired at police officers using one of their own weapons. According to reports, the situation began at around 11:45 a.m. on August 12th, when police received a mental health call to a residence near the town of Bridge Creek. They arrived to find a woman, later identified as 36-year-old Rachel Zion Clay, crawling around on the ground in the front yard of the property and barking like a dog. She was also yelling things that made no sense, saying things like, quote, "Answer the phone, you let her die, and I'm not human, you killed her." She also talked about a non-existent child who she said needed a blood transfusion. Realizing that Clay was in an obvious state of distress, officers decided to take her into custody for her own safety. She reportedly resisted for a while, but eventually officers were able to get handcuffs on her and place her in the back of a patrol car. Unbeknownst to the officers, however, while they finished up things at the scene, Clay managed to somehow slip out of her handcuffs. She then reached through a sliding plexiglass partition to the front of the patrol car and grabbed one of the officers' rifles. Apparently, the partition had been left open to ensure that the 36-year-old could feel the vehicle's air conditioning. According to reports, Clay proceeded to fire at least 10 shots with the rifle, one of which grazed a deputy's neck and another of which hit a civilian. Because Clay was now barricaded in the patrol car, police were not immediately able to approach her. The situation led to a tense standoff that lasted between 4 and 5 hours, during which time Clay wrote notes on pieces of paper with messages that were similarly nonsensical to the things that she had yelled when police first arrived at the scene. Finally, officers were able to reason with Clay, and she exited the vehicle peacefully and was taken into custody. She was subsequently booked into the Grady County Jail on multiple counts of shooting with intent to kill. While little additional information has been released about the case at this time, reports allege that Clay was supposed to be on medication for an undisclosed mental health issue at the time of the incident, but had stopped taking it. Authorities say that her charges may still be changed.
Authorities in Hillsborough County, Florida, say that the husband of a shooting victim has been arrested this week after he and 2 accomplices allegedly planned and carried out an elaborate murder plot that claimed the lives of 2 people. According to reports, the case began on July 18th when 22-year-old Erica Negrete was shot in cold blood outside of her home in the community of Dover. The mother of 3 was ambushed almost immediately after stepping outside that night, shortly after returning home from dinner with her husband, 28-year-old Cornelio Negrete. Cornelio told police that he raced outside after hearing gunshots, only to find Erica collapsed on the ground. He said that she told him to get his gun, and he did, but when he returned, he was hit by something in the head and briefly knocked out. He claimed that he regained consciousness just in time to watch his wife's attacker drive away in a truck he had stolen from their driveway. He called 911, but by the time police arrived, Erica was dead. When the news of the terrible crime was reported, Cornelio told local media outlets that he was heartbroken by the loss of his wife and that he would never fully be happy again without her. However, he stated that it was important for those responsible to be behind bars because then at least he would know that they couldn't do this to anyone else. His words proved to be rather ironic, as authorities now say it is Cornelio himself who is responsible for his wife's murder. According to investigators, Cornelio began plotting against his wife recently after learning that she had cheated on him with 2 different men at her work. In order to carry out the crime, he enlisted the help of his 27-year-old cousin Daniel Negrete and Daniel's girlfriend, 20-year-old Fatima Garcia Alvia. Daniel allegedly committed the shooting, stealing Cornelio's car and burning it about 8 miles away from the crime scene to cover their tracks. This initially appeared to work, as police were not able to recover any substantial evidence from the vehicle and were apparently unable to trace the bullet casings found at the crime scene to a suspect. However, things blew up in the suspects' faces when they allegedly tried to take the case a step further and pin the murder on Fatima's ex-boyfriend, 25-year-old Antonio Cuellar Enriquez. They reportedly did this by luring Antonio to Fatima's house, where Fatima tried to poison him. When this failed, she called Daniel over, who allegedly shot Antonio to death following a struggle. Fatima and Daniel then used Antonio's phone to send a text message to Erica's father, confessing to the crime and saying that the guilt was eating away at him. The thing that finally gave the 3 suspects away was the timeline. When police began investigating, they realized that the text message from Antonio's phone had been sent after he was already dead. That's when they turned their attention to Daniel, Fatima, and Cornelio. According to reports, Daniel and Fatima were arrested on August 2nd, while Cornelio was taken into custody on August 16th. Cornelio has now been charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, principal to first-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, and making false reports to law enforcement. Fatima and Daniel have each been charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
Though we've covered plenty of cases in the past where people have been arrested or even charged for abusing the 911 emergency system, representatives from California's San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office say that the culprit behind one such call will be getting off without so much as a warning this week. Don't worry though, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why. According to reports, the incident began sometime on the evening of August 13th, when dispatchers received a 911 call from a cell phone in the Paso Robles area. Upon answering, there was nothing but silence coming from the other end, and soon the call was disconnected. Despite repeated attempts by dispatchers to get back in contact with the caller, subsequent calls and text messages went unanswered. As is protocol in such cases, officers from the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office were sent to the area just to make sure that everything was okay. They arrived to find themselves at Zoo to You, a wildlife sanctuary and conservation organization. Staff, however, were adamant that nothing was going on, and that none of them had made the mysterious 911 call. Eventually, someone put the pieces of the puzzle together, and everything started to make sense. The culprit? A female capuchin monkey named Root. According to zoo staff, the company has a cell phone that is usually kept on a golf cart so that employees can stay in touch while traveling around the 40-acre site. Being the naturally curious creature that she is, it appears that Root picked up the cell phone off the cart at some point and began pressing buttons. It's unclear if she dialed the exact combination for 911 on the number pad, or whether she unintentionally activated a safety feature of a lot of modern smartphones, which make emergency calls if buttons are pressed in rapid succession. Either way, police were relieved that there was no actual problem, and joked about the whole thing in a subsequent Facebook post. They wrote that they didn't blame Root, because, quote, "After all, monkey see, monkey do."
Authorities in Kitsap County, Washington say that they have captured a 40-year-old suspect this week, days after he allegedly carried out the brutal murders of a married couple in their own home. According to reports, the case began at around 5:15 p.m. on August 18th when the daughter of 51-year-old Stephen and Mina Schultz went to her parents' property in the town of Olalla to check on them. To her horror, when she arrived at the residence, she realized that the house had been broken into and saw what appeared to be a trail of blood inside. Unable to immediately locate either of her parents, she backed away and called 911. When police arrived at the scene, they tragically discovered both Steve and Mina's bodies on the property. Authorities have not yet released how the couple died, but said that they were reportedly the victims of a gruesome crime. Following 2 days of investigation, police identified a suspect in the case, a 40-year-old man with a long criminal history named Sean Rose. An alert was put out for Rose's whereabouts, and he was eventually spotted on August 21st driving a white Buick in Mason County. After a brief car chase, Rose was able to lose police, reportedly ditching the Buick and stealing another car in Pierce County. However, his time on the run came to an end at approximately 8 p.m. that night when he was once again found by police, this time at a gas station in the city of Tacoma. He was taken into custody and has now been charged with felony murder. While few additional details have been released about the case at this time, authorities say that at the time of the double murder, Rose was already wanted for failing to show up at a pretrial burglary hearing earlier this month. Some sources state that the burglary took place roughly 3 miles away from this week's crime scene. At the current time, it's unclear if the murders were random or if Rose had some kind of connection to Stephen and Mina Schultz. The situation is still developing.
Authorities in Vanderburgh County, Indiana say that a 50-year-old woman and her 43-year-old former lover are each facing murder charges this week, more than 3 years after they allegedly planned and carried out the killing of her firefighter husband. According to reports, 51-year-old Robert Dewar had just finished up a 12-hour shift at the local firehouse when he returned home on February 26, 2019. However, before he could make it inside, the 28-year-old veteran of the Evansville Fire Department was shot 3 times in his driveway. He tragically died from his injuries. Though no charges in the case were immediately laid following the murder, early on, investigators started to turn their attention towards 43-year-old Larry Richmond, a man who was at that time engaged to Robert's wife's sister. Richmond had previously served 22 years in prison for murder and had only been released the previous year. Police also became suspicious of Robert's wife, Elizabeth Fox Dewar. At the time of Robert's murder, authorities would later learn, Elizabeth and Richmond were having an affair. This information was reportedly given to them by Richmond's son, who claimed that he had seen them kissing in a car. Not only that, but police recovered a letter written by Robert which suggested that he knew about his wife's infidelity. Perhaps the most damning piece of information, though, was a phone call which allegedly took place between Elizabeth and Richmond just minutes before Robert's murder. The next call Elizabeth made was to 911. Police were able to uncover this from cell phone records, despite the fact that both Elizabeth and Richmond allegedly tried to cover up their call by deleting it from the logs on their phones. Though it appears that it has taken some time for investigators to get all of the evidence together in the case, by the time murder charges were announced against Elizabeth and Richmond this week, both had already been in custody for some time. Elizabeth was arrested on perjury charges in connection with the case in July, while Richmond has been incarcerated since 2019, when he was arrested on federal gun charges. In that case, police were able to obtain a tote buried in Richmond's backyard, which contained multiple guns with obliterated serial numbers. At the time of this recording, both Elizabeth and Richmond have been charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder in connection with Robert's death. The situation is still developing. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.